comic book adaptations have come a long way. If you've been following this section of pop culture, you already know what I'm talking about, as comic book characters have been adapted from the page to both the small and big screen for decades with various kinds of results. For the last decade and a half, we've been blessed with a golden age of comic book adaptations where characters from all kinds of fame get brought to life. But I still feel plenty of people still decide to take it for granted. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about that, but I'm here to rank my top 15 favorite superhero movies of all time.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
With how much superhero entertainment has been a part of my life, I believe it only makes sense for me to make such a video. I could do a top 10, but then the amount of honorable mentions would be massive. I also know that since we're still getting more adaptations coming out, maybe they can join this ranking, but I'm not going to think about that and I'm just going to focus on the now. I'm mostly going to be praising these movies rather than going into summaries, as that will take too long. So that we're clear, there are some top tier films that I haven't seen, so don't expect them to see them here, which includes Superman, Superman 2, X2, X-Men United, Batman, and Batman Returns. Also, to not keep the pressure, some beloved films that I did watch didn't make it in because I liked them, but they didn't really strike me as much at too much of a chord to me. Those include X-Men First Class, Iron Man, The Avengers, and Thor Ragnarok. Now that that's out of the way, let's get started. Some of you might be upset at this, but here we go. Spider-Man. One of the first major superhero films I saw in my life, and it might be one of the most lighthearted ones on this list. It's one of the key films that made superhero movies popular during this century, and it mostly holds up, as it's got a solid origin story that is still memorable to this day, with fantastic casting, powerful morals, a likable cast, and a menacing villain that became a success for pretty much everyone. For a while, it was my favorite Spider-Man film before I rewatched a certain movie a few years later, but it's still a standout with a unique style courtesy of Sam Raimi and an innocent vibe that doesn't take itself too seriously while also still having an emotional impact. The corniness gave me hope that in the future, studios and directors wouldn't shy away from the source material unlike other ill-fated adaptations, but many have succeeded and have this to thank for it. Black Panther, the first comic book film to receive a Best Picture nomination, and I have no opinion on that. Despite the easy targets that the internet has made towards this, it is honestly one of the most inspirational superhero movies I have ever seen, as by the end of it, I wish I were T'Challa myself because of how great it is. This is one that really isn't about the story, but rather the characters' journeys, because the pacing can certainly slow down during certain segments, and it isn't as action-focused as some wish it would be. That doesn't seem to bother me, since it showcased a sleek visual style, fantastic world building, a dynamic cast with palpable chemistry, an iconic musical score, strong themes, and one of the franchise's greatest antagonists, as it is at its best with almost every element. The CGI is pretty awkward in some sections, which is weird because it looks great during other moments. Speaking of the cast, this proves you can have multiple female black characters that come with their own identities and passions. Also, T'Challa is just honestly one of my favorite MCU leads. Rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman. The most recent film from this list, The Batman. While I wish it had a more creative title, this one has already reached all-time heights. Proving that there is more than one way to pull off dark and gritty, the director and the production team have done what not many recent blockbusters have done, which is to really take advantage of the environment and make you feel immersed. It is one of the most visually stunning comic book films in the last 15 years with an epic and striking look, while also having an atmospheric musical score. The Riddler here, portrayed by Paul Dano, is also one of the best comic book movie villains in the last few years, while also having a bit of earned corniness. Also, how about Robert Pattinson? I was cheering for him to be good before release, and he really did embrace the character of Batman. I could say more on how much I love this, but I have already uploaded a full review. This other one was also a toss-up, but here's what I decided. Spider-Man No Way Home. Talk about an overhyped film that still managed to live up to expectations. I'll keep this one short as well, but this movie performed some of the best use of nostalgia bait in recent years, which leaves everyone satisfied, including myself. There were countless elements that were balanced perfectly while also still being Tom Holland's Spider-Man story, and being the culmination of the journey he's had since his introduction in the MCU. It is crazy that even with another certain film, you can still make one of the best Spider-Man films ever, while also being an ode and celebration of the character's long history, as well as being really funny, charming, and legitimately touching. Many others have reasons to love it, and I agree. I take back all the cynicism. For others, this is a top 10 worthy movie, but for me, it makes it so close, as it's all just personal preference. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I had both curiosity but also questions on it existing, but it did everything it needed to be a great superhero film, a great animated film, and a great Spider-Man film. It's different from the other ones while also having its own heart and humor, as well as fantastically choreographed action sequences. The movie is also very fast-paced while also having some time to pull off the necessary elements, while also having an extremely compelling and charming cast that makes you want to fall in love with them. That goes for Miles Morales, Peter B. Parker, Spider-Gwen, and the rest. While Kingpin isn't used as much as he could have, and the same goes for other side characters, it is still a home run. It's hard to praise multiple films without using the same words, but it has a unique animation style that helps it stand out from the other projects, and overall, this will definitely be one for the ages. Here's one that got plenty of praise but isn't talked about much. I think it may have to do with that franchise having a confusing timeline. X-Men Days of Future Past. I didn't have much interest in watching it, but ever since it was borrowed to me by a friend, I fell in love with it. Another film that balances various plot elements beautifully to create a high-stakes time travel story with great character moments and pacing that makes you want to hope for the best. I'm always on the edge of my seat every time as it exudes so much confidence in its storytelling and with the ensemble cast. The focus constantly switches, but it doesn't feel cheap as there are so many major characters that require the necessary screen time. Even those that aren't in it for often have plenty of badass moments to stick in your mind. The creativity is a sight to behold. The visual effects feel grand, as well as the ambitious scope that still manages to leave you caring for the characters and their struggle. The main antagonist, played by Peter Dinklage, is not as developed compared to the rest of the cast, but it doesn't detract from the rest. That's definitely going to be a recurring theme here. Here's where it starts to get hard. The Incredibles. A nostalgic one for many, including for myself, and it definitely holds up. I'm surprised I even liked it as a kid, as it was one of the only mature kids movies I saw back then which held my interest and attention. We all know why it's beloved, as it's not just it including detailed animation, it has a great story that also stands out, fully realized characters, a strong and believable family dynamic, a villain that is both funny and threatening, compelling action, and so much more. It handles the midlife crisis trope while not being annoying or overbearing, and poses tough and interesting questions on what it takes to be a hero and to which people. A true masterpiece through and through that will not be forgettable and will forever remain incredible. This is one that not only lived up to my expectations, but surpassed them. Logan. Despite being the third film in a trilogy with previous so-so installments, this one works perfectly well as a standalone film, where you don't need to know anything about the previous X-Men films, but it does help to know. It more than deserves this praise, as the creative freedom given to the team offers a poignant and grounded superhero tale inspired by modern westerns that gives the main cast the depth required to make this film soar. The trio consists of Logan, Charles, and especially Laura, giving this one a sense of humanity meant to prepare us for the darker moments that land thanks to the superb writing, directing, and performances. The decision to limit the effects and spectacle makes it stick out more during a time many would complain about there being too many comic book films. My only complaint is that the film's main antagonist, played by Richard E. Grant, is incredibly underwhelming compared to the rest, but it doesn't prevent it from having one of the best superhero movie endings in the last 12 years. It's a harsh watch, but when it's the right moment, prepare yourself for a ton of emotion and hurt. Guardians of the Galaxy. I didn't expect it to love as much as others, but here we are. As many have noted, this is one of the most surprising comic book films in recent times, thanks to the obscure source material, interesting casting, and weird vibe. Its quality feels too good to be true, but it exists. As I have rewatched it so many times thanks to its fast pace, beautiful visuals, memorable characters, a fantastic sense of imagination, and effective emotion that makes this a true sci-fi classic. I agree that Ronan as a villain isn't as developed as he should be, but I don't think he's as boring as others say. This also made its licensed songs popular again, and I don't feel like I need to add more as everyone already knows how this succeeded, so I'll just leave it here. Let's freaking go. Oh yeah, here we go baby. Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This is actually the first MCU movie I saw from beginning to end, and I loved it, which made me want to check out the rest of the movies, and I've been a fan ever since. This movie made Captain America my favorite character in the entire franchise, as it has what I believe is the best written story they've ever had yet, with it being inspired by political thrillers and it focusing on the price of freedom and free will. As a man getting used to the modern world, Steve has to deal with plenty of twists, turns, and intrigue that shakes him to his core with fantastic action sequences, a strong ensemble, and passionate directing. It always had me on the edge of my seat, and it has me rewatching it many times over. While one could try, I have no complaints that stick out with this one, as it still remains in my head to this day. It is a favorite for many, and it is for me too. Spider-Man 2. It has plenty of corniness and some weird moments with Mary Jane, but that's all I can say about it, as this is one of the many examples of what peak comic book film storytelling has to offer. Just about everything is perfection, from the drama, the portrayals of the characters, breathtaking action, plenty of heartbreak, pitch perfect pacing, and one of the greatest antagonists on any Marvel movie ever. You know it's beloved, I know it's beloved, and it even became my favorite Spider-Man film after rewatching it a couple years ago, and it still remains undefeated. Even with Tobey Maguire still being my favorite version of the character, it's no coincidence that he has the most amazing adaptations outside of comics out of any Marvel character in history. I am forever impressed that he still goes strong today, just like he was before I was even born. Captain America: Civil War. This is another example that Marvel can balance dozens of characters and not just keep the story consistent, but make something truly amazing out of it. It logically continues the arcs of Steve and Tony while not feeling like they're outshining each other. I had complaints before, like some coincidences feeling too much like coincidences, and some fan favorites of mine not getting more attention, but now I've come to truly appreciate the effort that came with focusing on character above everything, but also having strong drama and action. The supporting characters also feel mostly justified for being a part of this conflict, and others manage to steal the show even when not doing much. Baron Zemo isn't that interesting for me in this movie, but it wasn't the last we saw him, so it wasn't a total waste. The hype was real, and it truly delivered. Wow. Wow. Avengers Endgame. The cinematic event to end all cinematic events, and it delivered in ways I never imagined possible. It's one of the highest grossing films in history, and one of the best franchise finales in history, as this is a love letter and celebration to the previous 11 years of the MCU, and it hits you right in the feels, man. The threat feels real, the emotions are impactful, the scale and stakes feel grand, Arcs get concluded and it opens up many possibilities for the future. You aren't a real superhero fan if you haven't watched this, as it is something many, including myself, are grateful to see, as such an achievement getting pulled off with such satisfaction is just amazing. Some jokes do feel off, the middle section feels a little longer, and I wish there was a bit more in the climax despite it already being long, but it's as perfect as an ending for this part of the franchise as it could ever be. A part of me wishes this were the last one, but what came after ain't half bad either. Avengers Infinity War. I do like this a bit more than Endgame, but that's not a bad thing. This is undoubtedly one of the greatest cinematic experiences of my life, especially what happens at the end. You all know what I'm talking about. Despite being the first half of the story, it doesn't rely on filler. In fact, it ignores it. As if you were caught up like me, it starts right away and never slows down with some of the best pacing of the entire franchise in my opinion, despite it being really fast. It looks visually stunning, has some of the best action in the MCU, has lots of emotional moments without feeling repetitive, and has arguably the greatest villain they've written with Josh Brolin's Thanos. With it having the biggest cast in any movie, only a small amount have actual character development, with a few others getting shortchanged, but its quality makes up for it. It is such a gigantic achievement that was many years in the making with plenty of trust and planning required to make it soar. It is as incredibly perfect in its intention that I wouldn't change a single thing about it. Now for some honorable mentions. Since this was a long list, there aren't many other movies to mention here, but here we go. The Dark Knight Rises, Ant-Man, Batman Begins, Shazam, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Spider-Man Homecoming, The Suicide Squad. Now let's get to the big one. If you've been in the online superhero sphere for quite some time, then this is no surprise. The Dark Knight. Yup, this is number one. I saw this in its entirety for the first time ever in high school, and it has remained undefeated since. It is truly the perfect movie in general, as even some elements one might think might not work, ends up sticking the landing and expanded on it. One can also say this is more of an ensemble crime film than a traditional Batman movie, but it still stands out. Viewers can pick up that this is only the second DC movie on this list, and they're both Batman, but I'll leave it there. The Joker is still one of the greatest modern film villains, with an Oscar-worthy performance by Heath Ledger. Rest in peace, bro. The rest of the cast include Christian Bale's Batman, and many others delivers one of the most dynamite ensembles in comic book film history, and showcases one of the best dark, gritty, and immersive environments in comic book film history. Instead of talking about the movie, one can just watch it again, but this ranking is why I'm here. With its writing, direction, and dedication, it will likely never be topped, but it would be nice to see, that's for certain. And there we have it. I have always liked superheroes since I was a kid, despite rarely reading any comic books, as I have only been appreciating them more and more in my life since. The fact that they can have such amazing adaptations outside the source material proves that these stories should never be underestimated and forgotten. It has only gotten better, and I might not know how the golden age of superhero films might die down, but there will never be a time where there isn't a great movie. They have shaped pop culture on an international and mainstream level that influences storytelling, outdoor events, conversations, and just functioning as general entertainment. Is that it has helped in relationships, it brought me closer to others, brought me joy, and just straight up made me feel good. I still don't know everything about superheroes, but it is nice to keep learning more. It has always captured and fired up my imagination with the never-ending possibilities that come from these characters and worlds, and I thank the many creators that brought them to life, whether they're artists, editors, writers, actors, producers, directors, and everyone in between, thank you for your efforts. No matter how much others attempt to bring down their impact, I will always be part of the ride, no matter what happens. Excelsior, true believers!
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, see him fly. Spider-Man, zoom, zoom, bada bada boom, zooming through the sky. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, see him climb up the wall. Zoom, zoom, bada bada boom, like a fireball.